Can I trade $3 for your food?
William Carter looked down at the little girl standing near the entrance to the private dining section, her small hand stretched forward, 3 crumpled dollar bills resting in her palm like they were something fragile, something important. He glanced at the money, then back at her. $3? He repeated. $3 won't even pay for a side dish here, he said. This isn't how it works. If you want food, you go to the counter, you order, and then you pay. This area, he gestured lightly around them, toward the swinging doors that led into the kitchen and the private dining section. This is the kitchen area. People don't trade food here. The girl didn't move. She stepped closer instead. Please, sir, she said, her voice small but steady. I only have $3. That's all I have. Can you help me? Just this one time? She lifted the money higher so he could see it clearly. Here. I have $3, she said. You can take it. I just need some food for my mom. Before William could answer, the heavy kitchen door pushed open and the head chef stepped out, still wearing his white coat and apron, his forehead lined with stress and heat. He looked at Annie, then at William, and immediately straightened. Mr. Carter, I'm sorry, the chef said quickly. This is the girl I was telling the staff about. She came down earlier, asking for food for her mother. I told her I couldn't give her anything. Restaurant policy. We're not allowed to give out food without an order in the system. The chef looked genuinely uncomfortable now, wiping his hands on a towel. I turned around for 5 minutes and she disappeared. I didn't know where she went. And now she's back with $3 trying to trade for food. William looked back down at Annie. You went to get the money? He asked. She nodded. Yes, sir. Where did you get $3? Annie hesitated, like she was deciding how much truth adults could handle. People leave coins on tables sometimes, she said quietly. And one lady gave me $1 because I held the door for her. She said I was very polite. So now I have $3. The chef shifted his weight, clearly feeling worse by the second. Mr. Carter, I really am sorry. If it was up to me, I'd give her a full meal. But your wife's policy is very strict about inventory and waste. If food is missing, it comes out of our numbers. I could lose my job. William didn't respond right away. He was still looking at Annie. Why doesn't your mother come and ask for food herself? He asked. Annie looked down at the money in her hand, smoothing one of the wrinkled bills with her thumb. Because she won't, Annie said. She says we don't ask for things we didn't earn. She swallowed, then added softly. She eats very little now. She says she already ate at work, but I know she didn't. She gives the food to me and says she's not hungry, but she gets very tired. Yesterday she had to sit on the floor because she said the room was spinning. The chef muttered under his breath, Jesus. At that moment, a woman's voice came from behind William. What's going on here? William turned slightly. His wife, Elizabeth Carter, was walking toward them, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. Beside her was their teenage daughter, Emily, holding a phone in one hand, curiosity written all over her face. Elizabeth stopped when she saw Annie, then looked at William. Why is there a child in the kitchen entrance? William glanced at Annie, then back at his wife. She's trying to make a deal, he said calmly. Annie here has $3 and wants to trade it for food for her mother. Elizabeth looked at Annie properly now, really looking at her face. Annie held the money out again, this time toward Elizabeth as well, but her eyes kept returning to William, as if he was the one who had to decide. I have $3, Annie said. I wanted to ask if he could trade his food for my money. Elizabeth's expression changed slowly. She stepped a little closer, studying Annie's face, then her clothes, then her eyes again. Wait, Elizabeth said softly. What's your name? Annie. Annie, Annie, Elizabeth repeated, searching her memory. Then her eyes widened slightly. Are you Sarah's daughter? Sarah, who works the night cleaning shift downstairs? Annie nodded quickly. Yes, ma'am, she's my mom. Elizabeth's face lost some of its color. She looked at William, then back at Annie. Why are you asking for food? Where is your mother right now? She's in the basement, Annie said. She said she was just resting. But she didn't eat. She doesn't eat a lot anymore. She says food is for me because I'm still growing. Annie's voice became smaller. But she gets very tired now. Today she couldn't stand up for a while. Emily, who had been quiet until now, slowly lowered her phone. "Mom, is she sick?" Annie nodded. "She coughs a lot, but she says we don't go to the doctor unless it's very, very bad because doctors cost too much." There was a long, heavy silence in the hallway outside the kitchen. William looked at his wife. "The chef says she came down earlier asking for food but couldn't give her any because of restaurant policy." Elizabeth closed her eyes briefly, as if that sentence physically hurt to hear. When she opened them again, she looked at Annie with a completely different expression now, not as an interruption, not as a problem, but as a child. "How did you get the $3, Annie?" she asked gently. "I picked up coins people left on tables," Annie said, "and a lady gave me $1 because I held the door for her. I'm not working. My mom says I'm too young to work. But I can help a little." She held the money out again, her small hand shaking now. Finally, after holding herself together for so long, "Please," she said, "my mom is very hungry, but she won't say it. If I bring food, she will pretend to be mad, but then she will eat. I know she will." William slowly reached out and took the $3 from her hand. He looked at the worn bills for a moment, then at Annie, then at his wife. "She wants to trade," he said quietly, "so I'm going to honor the deal." He folded the money and put it in his pocket. "Take me to your mother, Annie," he said. "If I'm buying this trade, I want to meet the person I'm buying it for." Annie looked at him for a long second, like she was making sure he meant it. Then she nodded. "She's downstairs," she said. "I'll show you." William turned and followed Annie toward the servants' staircase. Annie walked a few steps ahead of him, her small shoes making soft sounds on the concrete floor. He heard footsteps behind them and turned slightly. Elizabeth was coming down the stairs, one hand lightly holding the railing, her expression tight with concern. Behind her, Emily followed, quieter than usual, her earlier curiosity replaced with something more serious. "I'm coming too," Elizabeth said. "If this is about Sarah, I want to see her." Emily nodded. "Me too." William didn't argue. For once, he didn't feel like the most important person in the situation. They followed Annie past shelves of paper supplies, past the laundry area stacked with white tablecloths, past dented gray lockers that lined the wall like a row of closed mouths. At the end of the hallway, Annie slowed. "She's in there," she said quietly, pointing to a small room with the door half open. Annie walked in first. William stepped to the doorway, Elizabeth and Emily just behind him. At first, he didn't see her. Then he realized the shape on the floor near the wall was a person. A woman lay on her side on a thin mat, one arm tucked under her head. A cleaning cart stood beside her, a mop leaning against the wall, a yellow caution sign folded in half on the floor. The room was small, windowless, lit by a single fluorescent light that made everything look pale and tired. "Mom?" Annie said softly, kneeling beside her. "Mom, I'm back." The woman stirred slightly but didn't fully wake. Annie gently touched her shoulder. "Mom, I brought someone," she said. The woman opened her eyes slowly, disoriented at first. Then she saw Annie and tried to sit up too quickly, grabbing the edge of the cleaning cart to pull herself up. "I told you to wait upstairs," she said weakly. "You're not supposed to be down here." "I'm sorry," Annie said quickly, "but you didn't eat." The woman was about to respond when she saw William standing in the doorway. Then she saw Elizabeth. Then Emily. Her face went pale. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said immediately to Elizabeth, trying to stand straighter, even though she was clearly dizzy. She wasn't supposed to bother anyone. "Annie, you need to apologize. Right now." "I'm not mad," Elizabeth said gently, stepping into the room. "Sarah, when was the last time you ate?" Sarah froze. She hadn't expected that question. "I'm fine," she said automatically. "I just needed a minute." Annie looked up at all of them, then spoke quietly, like she was telling a secret she had been holding for a long time. "She didn't eat last night," Annie said. "She told me she ate at work, but she didn't. She always says she's not hungry, but she gives the food to me." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. "Annie, and today she said she was just tired," Annie continued. "But she sat on the floor because she said the room was spinning." If this story touched your heart, please like this video. and leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. Your support helps this channel bring more meaningful stories to people who need them. And if you believe kindness and justice still matter in this world, don't forget to subscribe and be part of our community. Emily's hand slowly moved to her mouth. She had never seen anything like this up close before. Hunger, real hunger, did not look like television. It looked quiet. It looked like a woman trying not to fall while holding a mop. William spoke then, his voice low. "You used to work for my company," he said. Sarah looked at him and nodded once. "Yes, sir. Accounting support. 12 years. Elizabeth turned to William, surprised. "She worked for you?" Sarah answered instead. "I was part of the administrative staff that got cut last year." "It's okay. I know it was business." Annie reached into William's pocket area and pointed. "He took my $3, she said, looking at her mother. "We made a deal. I didn't beg. I traded." Sarah looked confused, then embarrassed. "You don't have to do that, sir. She shouldn't have bothered you." William slowly took the $3 out of his pocket and held them in his hand, looking at them for a long moment before speaking. "Your daughter didn't beg," he said. "She negotiated." He looked at Annie. "Tell your mom what you told me upstairs." Annie nodded and turned to Sarah. "I asked him if I could trade $3 for his food, because if we just take money, then we owe people, and owing people is dangerous." "When was the last time you ate a full meal?" Elizabeth asked softly. Sarah didn't answer. Annie did. "Yesterday morning," she said. Emily looked at her father then, really looked at him, as if she was seeing him in a place where his suits and offices and important phone calls didn't matter. William folded the $3 carefully and put them back in his pocket. "The deal stands," he said quietly. "But I'm changing the terms." Sarah looked confused. "Sir, you and Annie are coming upstairs," William said. "You're going to sit at a table and eat. Not in the kitchen. Not down here. At a table." "I can't," Sarah said immediately. "I'm on shift, and I don't belong upstairs." Elizabeth spoke before William could. "Yes, you do," she said firmly. "You work here. That means you belong in this building as much as anyone else." Sarah looked at her, stunned. Elizabeth stepped closer and gently touched the cleaning cart, then the thin mat on the floor. "No one who works for me should be so hungry they pass out in my basement," she said quietly. "If that's happening, then I did something wrong." There was silence in the small room. Then William spoke again, slower this time. "After you eat," he said, looking at Sarah, "we're going to talk about your job, the one you lost, because I have a feeling I made a decision about 12 years of your life in about 12 minutes. He looked down at Annie, and I think her $3 just bought me the chance to fix it. When they came back upstairs, the restaurant looked exactly the same as it had before. The chandeliers still glowed warmly. Glasses still clinked softly. A waiter laughed quietly near the bar. A couple in the corner argued in low voices over a phone. Nothing had changed. But for the 5 people walking out of the service hallway, everything had. Elizabeth didn't take them back toward the kitchen. She led them into the main dining room. "Table by the window," she told the hostess quietly. "Now," the young hostess nodded immediately, sensing from Elizabeth's tone that this was not a normal seating. Within seconds, a table that usually required a reservation and a credit card deposit was cleared and reset. Sarah stopped walking. "I can't sit there," she said quickly. "I'm in uniform. I'm not a customer." Elizabeth turned to her. "Today, you are my guest." Sarah looked down at her gray work shirt, at the small name tag that said Sarah, at her hands that still smelled faintly of bleach no matter how many times she washed them. "I don't belong up here," she whispered. William answered quietly. "You worked for me for 12 years. You helped build the company that paid for half the tables in this room. I think you belong anywhere you want to sit." Sarah didn't know what to say to that. So she said nothing and let Annie take her hand and lead her to the table. Emily pulled out a chair for Annie without being asked. It was such a small gesture, but Sarah noticed it immediately. People showed you who they were in small gestures, not big speeches. A waiter approached, clearly confused but professional enough not to show it. "Good afternoon, Mr. Carter." "Mrs. Carter," he said. Then he looked at Sarah and Annie, unsure what title to use, so he simply said, "Welcome. Can I start you with something to drink?" Sarah shook her head quickly. "Just water, please." Annie looked at the menu like it was a book written in another language. There were no pictures, just words she didn't know and prices that made no sense to her. William noticed and gently took the menu. "What do you like to eat, Annie?" he asked. She thought for a moment. "Chicken," she said. "And fries. My mom likes soup because she says it makes you full even if there's not much." William handed the menu back to the waiter. "Chicken, fries, and the house soup. And bring bread. A lot of bread." The waiter nodded and left quickly. For a few minutes, no one spoke. The sounds of the restaurant filled the silence: silverware, quiet conversations, a piano version of an old song playing through hidden speakers. Annie looked around slowly, taking everything in. The tall windows, the white tablecloth, the candles, the people dressed in clothes that looked like church or television. "Mom," she whispered, "this place is fancy." Sarah gave a small, tired smile. "Yes, baby, it is." Emily watched Annie for a moment, then asked, "Do you like school?" Annie nodded. "Yes, I like reading. My teacher says I read like a fifth grader." "That's really good," Emily said, and she meant it. William and Elizabeth sat across from Sarah, but for once William didn't feel like the man across the table was in a different world. In fact, he was starting to realize they had been living in different worlds for a long time and he just hadn't noticed. "Why didn't you call the company?" William asked gently. "After you were laid off, there were transition programs, placement services." Sarah gave a small, tired laugh. Not disrespectful, just tired. "I did," she said. "I called 3 times. They told me to apply online. I did. I never heard back." William felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What about unemployment benefits?" "I got them for a while," she said. "Then I got sick and missed an appointment at the office. They suspended the payments. By the time I fixed the paperwork, we were already behind on rent." Elizabeth looked down at the table. Emily stared at her hands. William asked the question he wasn't sure he wanted the answer to. "And medical insurance?" Sarah shook her head. "I lost it when I lost the job. The bread arrived first. A basket full of warm rolls." Annie looked at her mother before touching anything. Sarah nodded once. "Go ahead," she said. Annie picked up a roll and broke it in half, immediately handing the bigger half to her mother. "You eat first," Annie said. "I'm not that hungry," Sarah replied automatically. William watched Annie push the bread gently toward her mother. "You have to eat," Annie whispered. "You got dizzy again." Sarah looked at the bread for a long moment, then finally took a small bite. She closed her eyes as she chewed, like her body didn't know what to do with food after so long without enough of it. William looked away for a moment, giving her that privacy. "When I was a kid," he said slowly, not looking at anyone in particular, "my mother used to say she wasn't hungry too." Elizabeth looked at him, surprised. He almost never talked about his childhood. "She worked double shifts at a laundry," he continued. "She'd come home late, and there would be just enough food for one person. She always said she had already eaten." He paused. "I believed her when I was 6, he said. "I stopped believing her when I was 10. The soup arrived then, hot and smelling like chicken and vegetables." Annie watched carefully as the waiter set the bowl in front of her mother. "Careful. It's hot," the waiter said kindly. Sarah held the spoon, but her hand shook slightly. Emily noticed and quietly moved the water glass closer to her. "Thank you," Sarah whispered. They ate slowly at first, then a little faster as hunger took over. Annie kept watching her mother to make sure she was really eating. William watched Annie. Elizabeth watched Sarah. Emily watched all of them. After a while, Annie looked up at William. "Are you really going to take my $3? She asked. William reached into his pocket and took the bills out again, placing them on the table between them. "Yes," he said. "I am." Annie looked worried. "Then, are we even now?" William looked at the 3 small, wrinkled bills, then at Annie, then at Sarah. He thought about 12 years of work. About one signature. About a woman on a basement floor. About a child collecting coins from tables to buy bread. He shook his head slowly. No, he said quietly. We're not even. He slid the $3 back toward Annie. You paid for lunch, he said, but you didn't pay for what comes next. Sarah looked up, confused. Sir? William leaned back slightly in his chair, looking at both of them now. Tomorrow morning, he said, I want you to come to my office, not the restaurant, my company office. We're going to talk about your job, the one you lost. Sarah stared at him, not sure she had heard correctly. I don't want charity, she said quickly. I just need time to get back on my feet. This isn't charity, William said. This is me fixing a mistake. He looked at Annie again. Your daughter reminded me of something today, he said. Something I forgot a long time ago. What's that? Annie asked. William looked at the $3 one more time. That numbers look very different, he said slowly, depending on which side of the table you're sitting on. The next morning, William Carter arrived at his office earlier than usual. But for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about stock prices, shipping contracts, or expansion plans. He was thinking about a basement floor, a thin mat, and a little girl holding out 3 crumpled dollars like they were a signed contract. His office sat on the 32nd floor of a glass building overlooking the river. The lobby downstairs was all marble and steel, the kind of place where voices echoed and footsteps sounded important. His name was on the building in small metal letters near the elevator bank. Carter Logistics Group. For years, that name had meant power to him, control, proof that he had escaped the life he grew up in. This morning, it felt like a question. When he stepped out of the elevator, his assistant, Laura, stood up from her desk immediately. She had worked for him for 8 years and could read his mood faster than most executives could read a spreadsheet. You're in early, she said. You have the board call at 9, the Cleveland contract review at 10, and I need you to add a meeting, William said. 9:30, with Sarah Williams. Laura frowned slightly. Sarah Williams? From accounting? She was laid off last year. I know, William said. She's coming in today. I want her rehired. Laura blinked, sure she had misunderstood. Rehired? Into accounting? We'll figure out the position, William said. Full benefits, medical included. Starting immediately. Laura hesitated. The board is already sensitive about headcount after the last restructuring. If we rehire former staff, it may open the door for what? William asked calmly. For fixing a mistake? Laura didn't answer. She had never heard him use that word about a business decision before. He walked into his office, closed the door, and stood for a moment looking out over the city. Cars moved like slow streams of metal far below. People were already at work in buildings across the river. Thousands of lives moving at the same time, most of them invisible to men like him unless they appeared in a report. He remembered Annie breaking the bread in half and giving the bigger piece to her mother. He remembered Sarah trying to stand up straighter in a basement so she wouldn't look weak in front of her boss. At 9:30 sharp, Laura's voice came through the intercom. Sarah Williams is here. And she brought her daughter. I hope that's okay. It's fine, William said. When they walked in, Sarah looked like she had spent an hour deciding what to wear, and still wasn't sure she had chosen correctly. She wore a simple blue blouse and black pants, her hair pulled back neatly. Annie held her hand, looking around the office with wide, curious eyes. The office was bigger than their entire apartment. Good morning, Sarah said nervously. Thank you for seeing me. William walked around his desk instead of sitting behind it and shook her hand. I'm glad you came. Annie looked out the window. You can see the whole city from up here, she said. Yes, William said, but the higher you go, the easier it is to forget what's happening on the ground. He hadn't meant to say that out loud, but now that it was said, he knew it was true. He gestured for them to sit. I reviewed your file this morning, he said to Sarah. 12 years, perfect attendance for 10 of them, 2 promotions. Performance reviews marked excellent 5 years in a row. Sarah looked down at her hands. I liked my job. Why didn't you tell anyone you were sick? He asked. She gave a small, sad smile. Because people who are about to be laid off don't tell the company they might cost more in insurance. William didn't have an answer for that. And after you lost the job? He asked. I tried to find another office job, she said. But most places wanted younger people or part-time. No benefits. When I got sick more often, I took the cleaning job here because night shifts pay a little more. Annie spoke up quietly. Mom says a job is a job. There's no shame in working. William looked at her and nodded slowly. Your mom is right. He opened a folder on his desk and slid a paper across to Sarah. I want you to come back to Carter Logistics, he said. Full-time position, accounts review department, same level you were before you were laid off, same benefits. Health insurance starts immediately. Sarah stared at the paper but didn't touch it. I don't want special treatment, she said quietly. This isn't special treatment, William replied. This is me correcting a decision I made without looking at the people behind the numbers. She looked up at him then, really looked at him, trying to see if this was pity, charity, or something else. I can do the job, she said. I never stopped being able to do the job. I know, William said. That's why I want you back. Annie looked between them. Does that mean my mom won't have to clean floors at night anymore? Sarah's eyes filled with tears she had been holding back for months. Yes, she said softly. I think it does. Annie turned to William. Then I think the $3 was a very good deal. William smiled slightly. Yes, he said. I think it was the best deal I ever made. But even as he said it, he knew something else had started. This wasn't just about one job, one employee, one child, with $3. For the first time in a long time, William Carter was beginning to wonder how many other decisions he had signed that looked correct on paper but were completely wrong in real life. And that question was going to change much more than one woman's job. The news spread through the building faster than any official announcement. By lunchtime, 3 departments already knew that Sarah Williams had been rehired personally by William Carter. By mid-afternoon, people on 2 different floors were whispering about the little girl who had walked into Bellamy House with $3 and somehow ended up changing a decision made in the executive boardroom a year ago. By the end of the day, the story had reached the board. William was standing in the conference room on the 32nd floor, looking at a wall of glass and the reflection of 6 people sitting behind him at a long polished table. The quarterly board meeting had been moved forward, which was never a good sign. Urgent board meetings only happened when money was at risk, or power. Let's get straight to the point, said Martin Feldman, the CFO, a man who had worked in corporate finance longer than William had been rich. We heard you rehired a terminated administrative employee this morning. Full benefits. Yes, William said calmly. I did. Martin folded his hands. Without board approval, I'm the CEO, William replied. I can hire one employee without a vote. That's not the issue, another board member said. The issue is precedent. If you rehire one laid-off employee, others will expect the same. We cut those positions to protect the company's margins. William turned from the window and looked at them. Really looked at them. He had chosen most of these people himself over the years. Smart, ruthless, efficient, people who understood numbers and didn't get distracted by emotions. People exactly like the man he had been trying to be for 20 years. She wasn't just a number on a spreadsheet, William said. She worked here for 12 years, and we paid her for 12 years, Martin replied immediately. This is not a charity, William. This is a corporation. The word charity again. People like them used that word whenever compassion threatened profit. I reviewed the restructuring files this morning, William said. Do you know what I found? No one answered. We laid off 312 employees in that restructuring, he continued. Do you know how many of them were over the age of 45? A few board members shifted slightly. 204, William said. Do you know how many had ongoing medical treatments listed in their insurance files? Now Martin's expression changed slightly. That information is confidential. I own the company, William said quietly. Nothing in this company is confidential from me. He let the silence sit for a moment. 204 people over 45, he repeated. 117 with ongoing medical treatments, and we eliminated their positions 3 months before insurance renewals. Martin leaned back in his chair. It was a cost reduction strategy. It was a targeted cost reduction strategy, William corrected. We didn't just cut jobs. We cut the most expensive humans. No one spoke. William walked slowly to the table. I built this company to move freight, he said, to build software, to create logistics networks. Somewhere along the way, we turned into a company that studies spreadsheets to figure out which sick people cost the most. That's business, Martin said again. William shook his head slightly. No, that's math. Business is supposed to be people. One of the older board members, a gray-haired man named Howard who had been with the company since the early years, spoke quietly. What are you proposing, William? William slid a folder across the table. A reinstatement program, he said. We review the layoffs from last year. We offer positions back to employees with long-term service records. We restore benefits where possible. Martin actually laughed once. A short, sharp sound. Do you have any idea what that will cost? Yes, William said. I do. And you're willing to cut profits for that? William thought about Annie counting coins from restaurant tables, about Sarah lying on a basement floor because she was too hungry to stand, about his own mother saying she wasn't hungry 30 years ago. Yes, he said. Martin leaned forward. Then you need to understand something. If you do this, the board will have to answer to shareholders. Profits drop, stock drops. Stock drops, we get replaced, including you. William met his eyes. So be it. The room went very quiet. Howard looked at William carefully. This is about that employee, isn't it? Sarah. William shook his head slowly. No, he said. Sarah is just the first person whose name I learned too late. He looked around the table at all of them. We sit up here and talk about efficiency, he said. Do you know what inefficient looks like? Training new employees every year because we fire the loyal ones when they get sick. Losing experience. Losing loyalty. Losing people who actually care whether the company survives. He tapped the folder on the table. Loyal employees are not expenses, he said. They're assets. We just forgot how to calculate their value. Martin was quiet now, but his jaw was tight. You're talking about changing the entire cost structure of this company because of one emotional story. William didn't raise his voice. I'm talking about changing the company because I finally walked into the basement and saw what our decisions look like in real life. No one had an immediate answer to that. Finally, Howard spoke again. If we vote against this plan, what will you do? William didn't hesitate. I'll still do it, he said. Martin stared at him. You'd risk your position as CEO over this? William thought about Annie sliding $3 across a table like a business deal. Yes, he said, I would. And for the first time since he had founded the company, William Carter realized that he was no longer afraid of losing his position. He was afraid of becoming the kind of man who would walk past a hungry employee in his own building and never know her name. The board meeting ended without a vote, which in the corporate world was its own kind of warning. It meant conversations would happen behind closed doors. It meant phone calls to major shareholders. It meant pressure, quiet and polite and extremely dangerous. William returned to his office and closed the door, but he didn't sit down right away. He stood by the window again, looking down at the river cutting through the city like a line dividing two different worlds. A soft knock came at the door. Come in, he said. Elizabeth stepped inside and closed the door behind her. She didn't usually come to his office during work hours, unless something was wrong. Today, she walked slowly, looking around the office like she hadn't been there in a long time. I heard about the board meeting, she said. I'm sure you did, William replied. She sat down in the chair across from his desk but didn't speak right away. For a long moment, she just looked at him, studying his face like she was trying to understand when something had changed. Is this about the girl? She asked finally. Annie, it's about a lot of things, William said. Elizabeth crossed her arms slightly. The board is nervous. Martin called me this morning. He thinks you're about to make a very expensive moral decision. William almost smiled. That sounds like something Martin would say. And are you? She asked. William walked back to his desk but still didn't sit. Do you remember when we opened Bellamy House? He asked. Elizabeth looked surprised by the question. Of course. That was one of the hardest years of my life. You said you wanted a place where people felt respected, William said. Not just customers, staff too. You said if someone worked for you, they should be able to afford to eat in the restaurant they worked in at least once. Elizabeth looked down at her hands. I remember saying that. You also created a policy that no food leaves the kitchen without being paid for, William said gently. She closed her eyes briefly. Inventory control, waste management, that's what the consultants told us. Do you know what your policy looked like yesterday? William asked quietly. It looked like a hungry woman lying on a basement floor while a chef was afraid to give her soup because he might lose his job. Elizabeth didn't respond. She just sat there, very still. I'm not blaming you, William continued. I'm blaming both of us. We built systems, policies, structures, and then we stopped looking at what those systems were doing to actual people. Elizabeth finally looked up at him. I didn't know she was that bad. I didn't know either, William said. That's the problem. There was a long silence between them, the kind that only existed between people who had built a life together and suddenly realized they might have built some of it wrong. Emily couldn't sleep last night, Elizabeth said quietly. She kept talking about Annie. She asked me how a child could collect coins from tables to buy bread while we throw away food every night. William leaned back against his desk, folding his arms. I didn't have an answer when she asked me, Elizabeth continued. Do you? William thought for a moment, then shook his head. No, he said. I don't. Elizabeth stood up and walked to the window, standing beside him now. Far below, people moved along the sidewalks in steady lines, each of them carrying a life no one else fully understood. What are you going to do? She asked. I already told the board, William said. I want to start a reinstatement program, bring some of the laid-off employees back. Review the insurance policies. Raise the minimum salary for full-time staff. Elizabeth turned to him. That will cost millions. William nodded. Yes, and the board may remove you as CEO. Yes, and you're still going to do it? William was quiet for a long moment. When I was 10 years old, he said slowly, I asked my mother why she always said she wasn't hungry. Do you know what she told me? Elizabeth shook her head. She said, because it's easier for a child to sleep when they think their mother already ate. Elizabeth felt her throat tighten slightly. William continued, his voice steady but quieter now. I built an empire so I would never be that hungry again. But somewhere along the way, I forgot there are still people living like that. People working in our buildings. For our companies. For us. He turned to look at her. Annie didn't ask me for money, he said. She offered me a deal. $3 for food. She wanted dignity, not charity. Do you understand how rare that is? Elizabeth nodded slowly. Yes, I do. She reminded me of something, William said. Something I think we both forgot. What's that? Elizabeth asked. That success isn't measured by how high the building is, he said, looking out over the city again. It's measured by how the people in the basement are living. Elizabeth stood next to him in silence for a while after that. Finally, she spoke. I'm changing the restaurant policy, she said. Starting today, no employee in any of my restaurants will go home hungry. I don't care what the inventory reports say. William looked at her, and for the first time in a long while, felt like they were on the same side of something that actually mattered. That's a good start, he said. Elizabeth gave a small, sad smile. It's a late start, she replied, but it's a start. William nodded. And in that moment, both of them understood that the biggest changes in their lives were not going to come from boardrooms or contracts or new business deals. They were going to come from a little girl who walked into a restaurant with $3 and refused to beg. The first sign that something was changing inside Carter Logistics did not appear in a boardroom or a financial report. It appeared in the employee cafeteria on the 16th floor. For years, the cafeteria had been a quiet, functional place. People came in, heated their food, ate quickly, and went back to work. Conversations were short. Most people checked their phones while they ate. It was a place for refueling, not for talking. On Monday morning, a printed notice appeared on the wall near the coffee machines. Employee Meals Program. Starting this week, all full-time employees are eligible for one free meal per shift. No employee of Carter Logistics should work a full day hungry. W. Carter. People stopped and read it twice to make sure they understood correctly. Is this real? One warehouse coordinator asked. It's got his name on it. Another employee said. So yeah, it's real. By noon, the entire building was talking about it. On the 32nd floor, Martin Feldman stood in William's office holding the printed notice like it was evidence in a trial. You posted this without board approval? Martin said. William didn't look up from the report he was reading. Yes. You're adding operating costs across every facility. Yes. You're setting a precedent that this company is now responsible for feeding employees. William finally looked up. If a company can't afford to make sure the people who work for it can afford to eat, then that company is already failing. It just doesn't know it yet. Martin stared at him. You've changed. William thought about that for a moment. No, he said. I've remembered. Martin put the paper down on the desk. The board is meeting again on Thursday. They are going to push for a vote this time. If profits drop next quarter, they will blame this. They can blame me, William said. They will remove you, Martin replied. William nodded once. I know. Martin studied him carefully. Is this really worth losing your company? William leaned back slightly in his chair. I started this company in a rented office with 2 desks and a phone that only worked if you hit it on the side, he said. I've slept on warehouse floors. I've driven trucks myself when drivers didn't show up. This company was never supposed to turn into a machine that eats its own people. Martin didn't respond to that. He just picked up the notice again, looked at it one more time, then put it back down. I hope you know what you're doing, he said quietly. After he left, William sat alone in his office for a long time. Around 3 in the afternoon, there was a knock on his door. Come in, he said. It was Sarah. She stood in the doorway like she wasn't sure she was allowed to enter, even though she technically worked here again now. Hi, she said. I wanted to say thank you. For the job and the insurance. Annie has a doctor's appointment next week now. First one in a long time. William nodded. I'm glad. She hesitated, then stepped inside. People are talking, she said. About the meal program. They said you did that. I did, William said. She looked down for a moment, then back up at him. You know, when I first started working here 12 years ago, people used to say this was the best company to work for. People stayed for decades. They knew their kids could go to college. They knew if they got sick, they wouldn't lose everything. William didn't say anything. That changed the last few years. She continued gently. Everything became numbers, schedules, efficiency charts. People stopped talking in the hallways because they were afraid of being the next name on a list. William looked out the window again. I know. Sarah took a breath. I'm not angry about losing the job anymore, she said. Life happens, companies change, but I was angry because after 12 years, I disappeared like I was never here. That sentence stayed in the room for a long moment. I remember your name now, William said quietly. I wish I had remembered it then. Sarah gave a small smile. Annie says you're trying to fix things. I'm trying to fix what I can, William said. I can't fix everything. Sarah nodded. You don't have to fix everything, she said. Just fix what you can see now. Later that evening, William stopped by Bellamy House on his way home. He didn't usually go there at night unless there was an event. But today he wanted to see something for himself. He walked into the kitchen area and saw something he had never seen before in that restaurant. 3 employees were sitting at a small table near the back, eating from plates that had clearly come from the kitchen. Real meals, not leftovers in plastic containers, not food eaten standing up in a corner. Elizabeth stood near the counter, talking to the head chef. We'll track it as staff meals, she was saying. I don't care if food cost goes up a few points. We'll adjust somewhere else. The chef nodded, relieved. Thank you. You don't know how many times staff skip meals during double shifts. Elizabeth turned and saw William standing there. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the busy kitchen. It's a start, she said. William nodded. Yes, it is. Just then, Annie ran in from the back hallway and stopped when she saw William. Mr. Carter, she said. Mom said I shouldn't run in the restaurant, but I forgot. William smiled slightly. That's okay. Annie walked up to him and looked very serious for a moment. "Mom says we're not even yet," she said. "She says $3 is not enough for everything you're doing." William crouched down slightly so he was at her eye level. "Your mom is right," he said. $3 is not enough." Annie thought about that. "Then I will have to earn more money," she said. "So I can pay you back." William shook his head gently. "No," he said. "You don't pay people back by giving them money." "How do you pay them back?" Annie asked. William thought for a moment before answering. "You pay them back by doing the same thing for someone else one day," he said. "That's how the deal works." Annie considered this very carefully, like it was the most important contract she had ever heard. "Okay," she said finally. "Then that's what I will do." William watched her run back toward the kitchen where her mother was finishing her shift. For the first time in many years, William Carter felt like he had made a deal that was not written on paper, not signed in ink, and not measured in dollars. And somehow, it was the most important deal of his life. On Thursday morning, the boardroom felt colder than usual. Not because the air conditioning had changed, but because everyone in the room knew the meeting was no longer about numbers. It was about control. William arrived exactly on time. He didn't bring a presentation. He didn't bring charts. He didn't bring the usual folders full of projections and forecasts. He brought only a thin folder and a pen, and he sat at the head of the table like he had done hundreds of times before. But this time felt different. Martin Feldman sat to his right, already flipping through printed financial reports. Howard sat near the end of the table, hands folded, watching quietly. Two other board members joined by video on the large screen on the wall. "Let's begin," Martin said. "We've reviewed the projected cost increases from your new policies." He slid a paper across the table. "Employee meal program across all facilities. Reinstatement review program. Insurance policy adjustments. Salary floor increases for full-time staff." He tapped the paper with his finger. "If all implemented, operating costs increase by 8.4% this year." William glanced at the paper but didn't pick it up. "And?" he asked. "And?" Martin repeated. "That is a massive increase in operating costs, William. Shareholders will not accept an 8% drop in profit." William leaned back slightly. "We are still profitable. That's not the point. Public companies don't get rewarded for being profitable. They get rewarded for increasing profit." There it was, the real rule, the one nobody printed in employee handbooks. Howard spoke quietly. "What Martin is saying is that the board believes these changes are too aggressive, too fast." William nodded slowly. "I expected that." Martin folded his hands. "We are prepared to propose a compromise." William looked at him. "I'm listening." "We keep the meal program," Martin said. "It's good for public image. But we cancel the reinstatement program and the insurance restructuring. Those are the expensive parts." William didn't answer right away. "Do you know what the reinstatement program really is?" he asked finally. Martin sighed slightly. "Yes, it's you trying to fix layoffs from last year." "No," William said quietly. "It's me trying to fix the way we decide who matters and who doesn't." One of the board members on the screen spoke up. "You're being emotional about this, William. That's not how companies are run." William looked at the screen. "Companies are run by people," he said. "Or at least, they're supposed to be." Martin pushed a second document toward him. "The board is calling for a vote," he said. "If you continue pushing these changes against board recommendation, we will hold a vote of no confidence as CEO." The room went completely silent. William had known this was coming. Still, hearing the words out loud felt different. He had spent 20 years building this company from nothing. Every warehouse, every contract, every system had his fingerprints on it. And now the same system could remove him with a vote and a signature. Howard looked at him carefully. "You need to think about this, William. You can do a lot of good for a lot of people if you stay CEO. But you can't do anything if you lose control of the company." That was the most honest argument anyone had made so far. Power was only useful if you still had it. William sat there for a long moment, looking at the polished wood table, at the reflection of the lights above, at the faces of people who were not evil, not cruel, just very, very good at turning human lives into percentages. He thought about Annie standing in a restaurant holding $3 like it was everything she had. He thought about Sarah saying, "After 12 years, I disappeared like I was never here." He thought about his mother saying she wasn't hungry. Finally, he spoke. "When I started this company," he said slowly, "I told myself that if I ever became successful, I would never forget what it felt like to be scared of a bill in the mailbox." No one interrupted him. "I told myself I would build a company that didn't treat people like they were replaceable parts," he continued. "And somewhere along the way, I broke that promise." He looked around the table at each of them. "I'm not asking the company to lose money," he said. "I'm asking the company to make slightly less money so the people who work for us don't lose their lives when they get sick or get older." Martin rubbed his forehead. "You're asking investors to accept less profit." "Yes," William said. "I am. And if they refuse?" William didn't hesitate this time. "Then they can replace me," he said. The words settled into the room like something heavy being set down after being carried for a long time. Howard looked at him with something like respect. Martin looked at him like he was watching a man walk toward the edge of a building. "Are you sure?" Howard asked quietly. William thought about Annie again. "Yes," he said. "I'm sure." Martin nodded slowly. "Then we will schedule the vote." The meeting ended a few minutes later, but no one talked about profits anymore. No one talked about projections or contracts. The conversation had moved to a different place now. A place where numbers were not the only thing being measured. As William walked back to his office, employees moved out of his way in the hallway like they always did. Assistants nodded. Managers straightened up when they saw him. From the outside, nothing had changed. But inside, everything had. When he entered his office, he saw something on his desk that hadn't been there before. $3 bills, folded neatly, and under them, a small piece of paper with careful handwriting. "Mr. Carter, Mom says we are not even yet, but I am working on it. Annie." William sat down slowly and looked at the $3 for a long time. Then he opened his desk drawer, took out a small silver frame, and placed the 3 bills inside. He set the frame on the corner of his desk where he would see it every day, not as a reminder of charity, but as a reminder of a deal, and of the day a little girl walked into his world and changed the way he measured success. The vote was scheduled for Monday morning. By Friday afternoon, everyone in the executive floors knew what that meant, even if no one said it out loud. Assistants spoke more quietly. Managers watched William more carefully in meetings. People who had worked with him for years suddenly didn't know whether to talk about next quarter's plans or not talk about the future at all. Power, William realized, was a strange thing. When people believed you had it, rooms became quieter when you walked in. When people thought you might lose it, rooms became quieter for a different reason. Late Friday, there was a knock on his office door. "Come in," William said. Howard stepped inside and closed the door behind him. He didn't sit down right away. Instead, he walked to the window and looked out over the city the same way William often did. "I started in this company when we had one warehouse and a broken coffee machine," Howard said. "You were 30 years old and sleeping on a couch in your office." William smiled slightly. "That couch was terrible. You said you were going to build a company where drivers knew the boss's name and the boss knew the drivers' names," Howard continued. "I remember," William said. Howard turned around slowly. "Do you know when that changed?" William didn't answer. "It changed when we got big enough that you couldn't know everyone anymore," Howard said. "So we hired systems. Then we hired people to manage the systems. Then we hired people to manage the people who managed the systems. And somewhere in all of that, the people at the bottom disappeared." William nodded once. "I know." Howard studied him carefully. "The board is going to vote against you on Monday. Martin already has the numbers." "I assumed he did," William said. "You could stop this," Howard said. "Delay the reinstatement program. Reduce the insurance changes. Do it slower. Stay in power. Make changes quietly over time." It was the same argument he had been hearing all week. "Stay in power, so you can do good later." "Howard," William said, "how long have people like Sarah been waiting for?" "Later." Howard didn't answer. William continued. "There's always a reason to wait. Next quarter, next year, after the merger, after the market improves. And while we wait, people get sick. People lose houses. Kids grow up thinking their parents don't eat because they're not hungry. Howard exhaled slowly. You're going to lose the company. William shook his head slightly. No, I'm going to lose the title. The company will be fine. That company is your life's work. William thought about that for a long moment. Then he said something he had never said out loud before. No, he said quietly. It was my life's work. Now I think it was just my life's first chapter. Howard looked at him for a long time after that, then nodded once, like a man who had just heard an answer he didn't expect but understood anyway. You know, Howard said, most men spend their whole lives trying to become rich and powerful. Very few men decide, on purpose, to risk both. William gave a small smile. I already know what it feels like to be poor, he said. I don't know what it feels like to be a coward, and I'm not interested in finding out. Howard laughed quietly, the first real laugh in that office all week. Then he walked over and put a hand on William's shoulder. For what it's worth, he said, I voted for you when this company was nothing. I'll vote for you again on Monday, even if we lose. After he left, William sat down and opened his laptop, but he didn't look at emails or reports. Instead, he opened a blank document and began typing. Not a financial plan, a letter. Around 6 that evening, there was another knock on the door. This time it was Annie. She walked in carefully, holding her mother's hand. Sarah looked uncomfortable being on the executive floor again, like someone walking into a room where they used to belong but weren't sure they still did. Hi, Mr. Carter, Annie said. Hi, Annie, William replied. What are you doing here this late? Mom had to finish some paperwork, Annie said, and I wanted to show you something. She walked up to his desk and pulled something out of her backpack. It was a small jar, a glass jar, like the kind people used for coins. Inside were coins and a few folded dollar bills. Annie put the jar on his desk very carefully. What's this? William asked. My payback jar, Annie said. I'm putting money in it so I can pay you back for everything. William looked at the jar, then at Sarah, who looked embarrassed and a little emotional at the same time. You don't have to do that, William said gently. Annie shook her head seriously. Yes, I do. A deal is a deal. You said we're not even yet. William was quiet for a moment, looking at the jar full of coins. It probably wasn't more than $20. Maybe less, but he had signed contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars that meant less than that jar. He stood up, walked around the desk, and knelt down so he was eye level with Annie. Can I tell you a secret? He asked. Annie nodded. You don't pay me back with money, he said. You pay me back by doing something for someone else one day when you see they need help. Annie thought about that. Like you helped us? Yes, William said. Like that. She looked at the jar, then back at him. Then I will keep the money, she said. So I can help someone else. William smiled. That sounds like a very good plan. As Annie and her mother left the office, William looked back at the silver frame on his desk with the $3 inside. On Monday morning, he might lose his company. But as he looked at the jar of coins Annie had left on the corner of his desk, next to the framed $3, he realized something important. For the first time in his life, he finally understood the difference between making money and making a difference. And he knew, no matter what happened on Monday, which one mattered more. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of Chicago morning where the wind moved between buildings like it was looking for something to punish. William Carter stood in his office, looking out over the river, but he wasn't really seeing the water or the traffic or the people hurrying to work with their heads down against the wind. He was thinking about a rented office with 2 metal desks and a phone that only worked if you hit it on the side. He was thinking about sleeping on a couch with his suit jacket folded under his head. He was thinking about his mother counting cash at the kitchen table and pretending not to be worried when the numbers didn't add up. There was a knock on the door. Mr. Carter, Laura said softly through the door. The board is ready. He adjusted his tie, not because he cared how he looked, but because he had learned a long time ago that people listened differently when you looked like you were in control. I'll be right there, he said. When he walked into the boardroom, everyone was already seated. Martin sat with a neat stack of documents in front of him. Howard sat quietly, hands folded. The others looked polite, professional, and prepared to end a man's career over coffee and bottled water. Let's begin, Martin said. William sat at the head of the table, the same seat he had sat in for years, the same seat where he had approved expansions, layoffs, acquisitions, and strategies that had made everyone in this room very rich. Martin slid a document across the table. "This is the formal vote," he said. "The board has reviewed the projected financial impact of your policy changes. The majority of the board believes these decisions are not in the best interest of shareholder value." Shareholder value. Such a clean phrase. Such a dangerous phrase. Howard looked at William. "Before we vote, you have the floor," he said. William nodded slowly. He didn't stand right away. He looked around the room first, at each person, at the long table, at the city visible through the glass wall behind them. Then he stood. "I'm not going to show you charts this morning," he said. "You've already seen the numbers. The numbers are clear. These changes will reduce profits in the short term." Martin nodded slightly, as if to say, finally, "We are speaking the same language. But I want to tell you a story instead," William continued. Martin sighed quietly, but Howard leaned forward slightly. "A week ago," William said, "a little girl walked into a restaurant with $3 in her hand and asked if she could trade it for food." He saw Martin shift in his chair, already impatient. "She didn't ask for money," William continued. "She didn't beg. She wanted a fair trade, because her mother taught her that if you just take money, you owe people, and owing people is dangerous." The room was very quiet now. "Her mother used to work for this company," William said. "For 12 years, perfect attendance, excellent performance reviews. Then we laid her off. 3 months later, she lost her health insurance. A few months after that, she was working nights cleaning floors in a building we own. Last week, she passed out in the basement because she hadn't eaten." No one spoke. William looked at the table, then back at them. "On paper, the restructuring we did last year was a success," he said. "We reduced costs. We increased profit. We made shareholders happy." He paused. "But I went into the basement last week," he said, "and I saw what that decision looked like in real life." He let that sentence sit in the room. "I built this company," he continued, "because I believed that if you worked hard and stayed loyal, you could build a stable life. I believed that because that's what I wanted when I was young." He looked at Martin now. "But somewhere along the way, we stopped building a company and started building a machine. And the machine works very well. It produces profit. It produces growth. But it does not take care of the people who make it run." Martin finally spoke. "William, with all due respect, we are not responsible for every personal hardship of every employee." William nodded. "You're right. We're not responsible for everything. But we are responsible for the decisions we make." He placed both hands on the table. "We decided that older employees with higher medical costs were too expensive," he said. "We decided that cutting them would improve our numbers. And it did. But we never asked what would happen to them after." One of the board members spoke from the screen. "This is unfortunate, but it's not the company's responsibility to solve social problems." William looked directly at the screen. "It becomes our responsibility when our decisions create the problem." Silence again. William took a slow breath. "You're going to vote today," he said, "and you're probably going to vote to remove me. I understand that. Because what I'm proposing does not maximize short-term profit." He looked around the room one more time. "But I want to be very clear about something," he said. "If you remove me because I chose to make sure the people who work for this company can afford to eat and see a doctor, then that is a decision I can live with." Howard looked down at the table, his jaw tight. Martin looked at William like he was looking at a man who had just voluntarily stepped out of a lifeboat. William sat down. "I'm done," he said. "You can vote." The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the air system. Martin picked up the voting document, his face unreadable now. "All in favor of removing William Carter as CEO of Carter Logistics Group, effective immediately, please indicate." One but not hands began to raise, not fast, not happily, but they raised. William did not look away. He watched every hand. Because he believed if you were going to lose something, you should at least have the courage to look at the moment it left you. When it was done, Martin lowered his hand last. "The vote passes," he said quietly. "Effective immediately." No one spoke for a long moment after that. Then Howard stood up, walked around the table, and held out his hand to William. "You built something important," he said. "Don't forget that." William shook his hand. "I'm just trying to build something important again," he replied. As William walked out of the boardroom, past the assistants, past the offices, past the people who were pretending not to watch him leave, he felt strangely calm. He had walked into that room as the CEO of a billion-dollar company. He walked out of it unemployed. But as he stepped into the elevator and the doors closed, he reached into his pocket and felt the edge of 3 folded dollar bills he still carried with him. And he realized something. He had lost his company, but he had not lost himself. When William Carter walked out of the building that afternoon, no one stopped him. That was the strange thing about losing power. The world didn't end with a loud noise. There was no dramatic music, no announcement, no moment where everyone gathered to watch the fall of a man who used to run everything. The elevators still opened and closed. Phones still rang. Trucks still left warehouses on schedule. Meetings still happened in rooms with glass walls and expensive chairs. The company kept moving, exactly as it was designed to do. Just without him. He stepped out onto the sidewalk and stood there for a moment, feeling the cold wind move through the city streets. For 20 years, he had walked into buildings where people waited for him to arrive. Now he was just another man in a coat standing on a busy street on a Monday afternoon. He expected to feel panic. Instead, he felt something else. Quiet. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He looked at the screen. Dozens of messages, emails, missed calls, news alerts were already starting to appear. Carter, Logistics, Board removes founder. As CEO, leadership change after policy dispute. Investors react to management shakeup. He turned the phone off and put it back in his pocket. For the first time in years, he had nowhere he had to be in the next 10 minutes. So he started walking. He didn't call a driver. He didn't call Elizabeth. He just walked through downtown Chicago like a man who was trying to remember something he had forgotten a long time ago. He passed construction workers eating lunch from foil containers, a woman pushing a stroller with one hand and talking on the phone with the other, 2 delivery drivers arguing about parking tickets, a group of teenagers laughing too loudly outside a convenience store. Normal life, the kind of life that never appeared in boardrooms. After a while, without really planning to, he found himself standing in front of Bellamy House. He stood there for a moment, looking through the window at the white tablecloths and the soft lights inside. A few customers were having late lunch. A waiter poured water. Someone laughed near the bar. He pushed the door open and walked inside. The hostess looked up and froze slightly. "Mr. Carter," she said automatically. "Hi, Megan," he said. He had made it a habit years ago to learn the names of front staff. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped coming often enough to keep that habit. "Is Mrs. Carter here?" he asked. "She's in the office," Megan said. "I'll let her know." William nodded and walked toward the back. As he passed the kitchen entrance, he saw 2 line cooks eating from plates during a break, something that would not have been allowed 2 weeks ago. Elizabeth was in the small office behind the kitchen, looking at invoices. She looked up when he walked in, and for a second neither of them spoke. She had already seen the news. "So?" she said quietly. "It happened." "Yes," William replied. She studied his face carefully. "How do you feel?" He thought about the question honestly before answering. "Like I just sold a very big company for $3, he said. Elizabeth shook her head slightly, half sad, half proud. "You always did make strange deals." There was a knock on the office door, and before either of them answered, Annie peeked in. "Mr. Carter," she said, then stopped. "Mom said I should knock, but I forgot again." "It's okay," William said. And he meant it. Sarah appeared behind her, still in her office clothes now. Instead of the cleaning uniform she had worn just days ago, she looked from Elizabeth to William, and she knew immediately. "They did it," she said quietly. William nodded. "Yes." Sarah looked down for a moment, then back up at him. "I'm so sorry." William frowned slightly. "Why are you sorry?" "Because this is happening because of me," she said. "Because you helped me." William shook his head immediately. "No," he said. "This is happening because of decisions I made long before I met you. You just helped me see them clearly. Annie walked into the office and looked up at him. Does this mean you don't have a job now? William smiled a little. Yes, he said. That's exactly what it means. Annie thought about that very seriously. Are you in trouble? No, he said. I'm just between jobs. She nodded like that made sense to her. Mom says when you lose a job, it means you have to find a new one, Annie said. But you're very smart, so I think you will find one. Elizabeth laughed softly, and even Sarah smiled. William looked at Annie and said, I think you might be right. Annie walked over and put something on the desk, another dollar bill. I'm still working on paying you back, she said. William looked at the dollar, then at her. I told you, you don't have to pay me back. I know, Annie said. This is not for paying you back. This is for your new company. William blinked. My new company? Yes, Annie said, like it was obvious. You said you built your company from nothing, so you can do it again. This is the first dollar for the new one. For a moment, no one in the room spoke. William looked at the single dollar bill on the desk. He had started his first company with a small loan and a used desk. And now, standing in his wife's restaurant office after being fired from his own company, a little girl was handing him $1 to start again. He picked up the bill and folded it carefully, the same way he had folded the $3. Then I guess, he said slowly, I have an investor now. Annie smiled. Yes, she said. But I don't want to be the boss. I just want you to help people. William nodded. I think, he said, that's exactly what the new company is going to do. The first week after William lost his company felt strangely quiet, but not empty. Every morning, he still woke up at 5:30 out of habit. For 20 years, his life had been scheduled in 15-minute blocks. Now, for the first time since he was in his 20s, there were no meetings on his calendar, no reports waiting for his approval, no board members asking for projections. On Wednesday morning, he sat at the small table in the corner of Bellamy House before the restaurant opened, a cup of black coffee in front of him and a yellow legal pad on the table. Across from him sat Annie, swinging her legs under the chair, and Sarah, who still looked like she wasn't completely used to wearing office clothes again instead of a cleaning uniform. Elizabeth stood behind the counter, pretending to review inventory but really listening to every word. So, Annie said, very serious, what is the new company going to do? William looked at the yellow legal pad. At the top of the page he had written 2 words. New company. Under that, nothing yet. That's a very good question, he said. What do you think it should do? Annie didn't even have to think. Help people, she said. William smiled slightly. That's a good mission, he said, but we need a business too. Companies have to make money or they disappear. Sarah nodded. That's true. A company that only helps but doesn't earn doesn't survive. Annie frowned, thinking very hard. Then the company should make money by helping people, she said. William looked at her for a long moment. Then he wrote something down on the paper. Make money by helping people. He underlined it. You know, he said slowly, most companies try to make money first and help people later. Maybe that's the wrong order. Elizabeth walked over and set a plate with toast on the table in front of Annie without interrupting the conversation. What kind of people do you want to help? Sarah asked Annie gently. Annie answered immediately. People who are tired. William looked up. Tired? Annie nodded. Like my mom. Like the people who work all day and still don't have enough. Like the man who washes dishes here. He works 2 jobs. He told me he sleeps 4 hours. Sarah looked at William. There are a lot of people like that. William nodded slowly. Yes, he said. There are. He started writing again. Ideas. Jobs with health insurance. Training programs. Hiring older workers. Hiring single parents. Evening shifts for parents. Meal programs. Education support. Sarah watched him write. You're serious about this, she said. I'm more serious about this than I was about making my first million, William replied. Elizabeth leaned against the back of a chair. What kind of company, though? Another logistics company? William shook his head. No, I already know how to make money moving boxes. That's not what I want to build now. He tapped the pen against the paper, thinking, every company in this city needs reliable workers, he said. Warehouses, offices, maintenance, food service, delivery, customer service. But there are thousands of good people who don't get hired because they're too old, or they were sick, or they took time off to take care of family. Sarah nodded slowly. That's true. When you have a gap on your resume, people stop calling. So what if, William said slowly, thinking as he spoke, we build a company that trains and employs people who other companies ignore. We train them, we give them stable jobs, and then we contract their work out to bigger companies. Elizabeth's eyes lit up slightly. A staffing and training company. Yes, William said, but with benefits. Real benefits. Health insurance, meals, stable schedules. Sarah leaned forward slightly. People would line up for jobs like that. Companies would line up too, William said. Because trained, loyal workers are more valuable than constantly hiring new people who leave. Annie raised her hand slightly like she was in school. Can the company have a rule? She asked. William smiled. What rule? No one who works there is allowed to be so hungry they fall down, Annie said. William looked at her, then wrote on the paper in big letters, Rule Hasson. No one who works here goes hungry. He circled it. Sarah looked at the words and had to blink a few times before her eyes cleared again. You know, she said quietly, if a company like that existed a year ago, my life would be very different. William nodded. That's why we're going to build it now. Annie looked at the paper like it was a treasure map. What will the company be called? She asked. William thought for a long moment. He looked at the words on the page. Make money by helping people. No one who works here goes hungry. He thought about warehouses and offices and restaurants and cleaning crews and drivers and single mothers and older men with bad backs and people who were one medical bill away from losing everything. He thought about a basement floor and 3 crumpled dollar bills. Then he wrote 2 words at the top of the page, above new company, and turned the paper so Annie and Sarah could see. S.E.Con Chance. Annie smiled immediately. I like that name, she said. Sarah looked at the words for a long time. So do I, she said quietly. William leaned back in his chair and looked at the paper. Second chance. He had lost a billion-dollar company, and somehow, sitting at a small table with a cup of coffee, a tired mother, and a little girl who believed in deals and fairness, he felt like he was about to build something much bigger. The office for Second Chance was not in a glass tower. It was on the 3rd floor of an old brick building 10 blocks away from the river, above a closed travel agency, and next to a small tax office with a flickering sign. The hallway smelled faintly like old carpet and burned coffee, and the elevator worked only if you held the button down the entire time. But the rent was cheap, and the windows were big, and William Carter had started his first company in a place that looked very similar. On the first morning there were only 4 desks, one for William, one for Sarah, one for a man named Luis who had worked as a warehouse supervisor for 20 years before his company replaced him with software, and 2 younger managers, and one small desk in the corner for Annie, who insisted she was in charge of important ideas. They didn't have a fancy sign yet, just a printed piece of paper taped to the glass door. Second chance. Training. Jobs. Benefits. Dignity. Sarah stood in the middle of the small office, looking around like she couldn't quite believe she was there. I used to walk past offices like this when I worked downtown, she said. I always wondered what people did inside. William smiled slightly. Mostly paperwork and worrying, he said. Same as any other office. Just different numbers. Luis was assembling a second-hand desk they had bought from a liquidation sale. You know what's funny? He said. I managed a warehouse with 200 employees. Now I'm building furniture again. You're building the company, William said. The furniture is just practice. Annie sat at her small desk with a notebook open, drawing something very carefully. What are you working on? Sarah asked her. Our rules, Annie said. Every company needs rules. William walked over. Can I see? She turned the notebook around. Written in large, careful letters were her rules. Rule 1. No one goes hungry. Rule 2. If someone is sick, we help them. Rule 3. If someone is old, we don't throw them away. Rule 4. If someone works hard, we don't forget them. Rule 5. The boss has to listen. William read the list slowly, then pulled out a pen and added something under Rule 5. Rule 6. The boss remembers where he came from. Annie nodded. That's a good rule. By the end of the first week, they had their first contract. It wasn't a big contract. It wasn't worth millions. It was a maintenance and logistics support contract for a mid-sized manufacturing company in the south side of Chicago. The company needed reliable workers for packaging, inventory, and evening cleaning shifts. They don't care about resumes, Louise said after the meeting. They care about people who show up and don't quit after 2 weeks. That's our entire business model, William said. They started with 12 employees, a 52-year-old forklift driver with a bad knee, who hadn't been able to find steady work in 2 years. A single mother who could only work between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. while her kids were in school, a former office assistant who had taken 5 years off to take care of her sick father and couldn't get an interview anywhere because of the gap in her resume. 2 men who had been laid off from Carter Logistics the previous year. On the first day, William stood in the small office and looked at the group of 12 people sitting in folding chairs. He didn't give a big speech. He didn't talk about profits or growth or strategy. He just told them the truth. This company exists for one reason, he said, because good workers are not disposable. If you work hard here, we take care of you. If you get sick, we help you. If life knocks you down, we don't replace you, we help you stand back up. One of the men in the back raised his hand. What's the catch? He asked. There's always a catch. William nodded. Yes, he said. There is a catch. The room got very quiet. The catch is you have to show up, William said. You have to work hard. You have to take care of each other. This is not charity. This is a company. We succeed or fail together. Louis stepped forward then. I've worked in warehouses my whole life, he said. You know what the difference is between a good company and a bad company? No one answered. A good company knows your name, Louis said. A bad company knows your employee number. There were a few quiet nods around the room. After the meeting, as people filled out paperwork and asked questions about schedules and insurance forms, Sarah sat at her desk processing new employee files. She looked up at William and said quietly, "Do you realize what you're doing?" William looked at the small office, at the second-hand desks, at Annie in the corner explaining Rule 1 to a new employee like it was company law, at Louise helping someone fill out a form because they were embarrassed about their handwriting. I'm building the company I thought I was building 20 years ago, he said. Sarah smiled. Then this time, don't forget the basement. William nodded. I won't, he said. That afternoon, Annie walked into his office and put something on his desk. Another $1. For the company, she said. William opened the drawer and placed the $1 in the same silver frame where the original $3 were. Annie, he said, at this rate, you're going to become the majority investor. She smiled. That's okay, she said, but I still don't want to be the boss. William looked around the small office again, at the people working, talking, filling out forms, starting over. Don't worry, he said. This company doesn't have one boss. Then who is the boss? Annie asked. William thought for a moment, then said, the mission is the boss. Annie nodded like that made perfect sense. And in that small office above a closed travel agency, with second-hand desks and handwritten rules, a new kind of company was beginning to grow. Not the fastest, not the most profitable, but maybe, William Carter thought, the most important. 6 months after the small sign that said "Seek on Chance" was taped to the glass door, William Carter stood in the same small office and looked around at a place that no longer looked small. There were no empty desks anymore. The travel agency downstairs was still closed, but the office on the 3rd floor was now full of people. Phones rang, printers hummed. Someone laughed in the hallway. On the wall near the entrance, Annie's rules were now framed instead of written in a notebook. Rule 1, no one goes hungry. Rule 2, if someone is sick, we help them. Rule 3. If someone is old, we don't throw them away. Rule 4. If someone works hard, we don't forget them. Rule 5. The boss has to listen. Rule 6. The boss remembers where he came from. Under the rules, someone had added a new line. Rule 7. Everyone gets a second chance, sometimes a third. Sarah walked into William's office holding a folder. She looked different now, healthier, stronger, not just because she had a stable job and health insurance again, but because she stood like someone who knew she belonged where she was. We're at 86 employees, she said. 3 new company contracts start next month. And the training program is full again. William nodded. How many of our employees are over 45 now? Almost half, Sarah said, and most of them were unemployed for more than a year before coming here. William leaned back in his chair. And attendance? Higher than any company I've ever worked for, Sarah said. Turns out, when you treat people like they matter, they show up. William smiled slightly. That's a very complicated business strategy, he said. She smiled back. Very complicated. There was a knock on the open door and Luis stepped in. You need to see this, he said, holding a tablet. What is it? William asked. Luis turned the screen toward him. It was a news article. Former CEO who was fired, starts company that hires workers everyone else ignores. Second Chance Staffing sees rapid growth while offering full benefits to low-income workers. There was a photo of their small office. And a photo of William. And, to his surprise, a photo of Annie standing in front of the framed rules. Annie chose that moment to walk in, her backpack bouncing against her shoulder. I'm famous, she announced. William laughed. Yes, it appears you are. She walked over and looked at the article on the tablet. They spelled my name right, she said, relieved. Sarah shook her head, smiling. That's what you're worried about? Yes, Annie said. Because this is an important company. William looked at the article again. There was a quote from one of their employees, the 52-year-old forklift driver they had hired in the first group. I thought my working days were over, the man had said in the article. No one wants to hire a man with a bad knee and gray hair. Second Chance didn't just give me a job, they gave me my life back. William handed the tablet back to Luis, but didn't say anything for a moment. 6 months ago, he had been in a glass tower worrying about profit margins and shareholder calls. Now he was in a second-floor office above a closed travel agency, running a company that most investors would have called a terrible business model, and he had never been more proud of anything in his life. That afternoon, there was a small gathering in the office. Nothing fancy, just coffee, sandwiches, and a cake that said 6 months in blue letters. All the employees crowded into the main room, talking and laughing. Some still in work uniforms, some in office clothes. William stood near the wall, watching them. Sarah stood beside him. Annie stood in front of the cake like she was guarding it. Luis tapped a glass with a spoon. Okay, listen up, he said. The boss is going to say something. William shook his head. I'm not very good at speeches. Too bad, Luis said. You're the boss. William looked around the room, at 86 people who had been given jobs when most companies wouldn't even give them interviews. At Sarah, who no longer looked like a woman who might faint from hunger. At Annie, who was trying very hard not to touch the cake before permission. He took a breath. 6 months ago, he said, this company was an idea on a piece of paper and 4 desks in a rented office. He paused. But the truth is, this company really started with $3. Some people in the room had heard the story. Some hadn't. But everyone was listening. A little girl offered me $3 for a plate of food, William said. At the time, I thought she was asking for help, but she wasn't. She was offering me a deal. He looked at Annie. She reminded me that dignity is more important than charity, he said. And that a good deal is one where both people walk away with something valuable. He looked back at the employees. I thought I was the one helping people when we started this company, he said. But the truth is, you helped me. You helped me build a company I'm not ashamed of. You helped me remember why I started working in the first place. The room was very quiet now. This company will grow, he continued. We will get bigger. We will get more contracts. We will make more money. but we will never break the rules on that wall." He pointed to Annie's framed rules. "If we ever become a company where people are just numbers again," he said, "then we don't deserve to exist." Luis nodded slowly. Sarah wiped her eyes quietly. A few employees looked down, pretending they weren't emotional. Annie raised her hand. "Can I say something?" she asked. William smiled. "Of course." Annie stood in front of everyone, very serious. "When I asked Mr. Carter if I could trade $3 for food," she said, "I thought I was buying dinner." She paused. "But I think I bought a company." For a second, the room was silent. Then people started laughing softly, and then clapping, and then the clapping grew louder until the small office was filled with the sound of people who felt like they were part of something that mattered. William looked at Annie, then at the people in the room, then at the framed $3 on the wall. He had built a billion-dollar company once, but this small company with handwritten rules, second chances, and people who knew each other's names, this was the company he would be remembered for. And for the first time in his life, William Carter knew he had made the right deal. This story teaches us that true success is not measured by money, power, or titles, but by how we treat people who have less than we do. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can change not just one life, but many lives. The little girl did not ask for charity. She asked for dignity, and that reminded the billionaire of the values he had forgotten. The lesson is simple but powerful. When you have the ability to help someone, you should, because one small act of fairness and compassion can create a second chance for someone else, and sometimes a second chance for yourself too. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.